Hello, very beautiful community. Hello, very beautiful community. I would love to know if you can see and hear me. And it's a great privilege to welcome you to this Sunday personal question and answer session, whereby you're going to be bringing me your challenges. And I'm going to scroll upward and see where we are with questions that were left there before we started. So beautiful community. You're very, very welcome. You can see and hear me. Is that correct? And I have to say, I am at about a 3 out of 10 in cognitive function today because I've just been stabilizing my breathing with high levels of oxygen. So I'm going to do my very best to be as present for you as I possibly can be. But that's all I can do. Just do my very, very best. So, sound and picture good. Let's rock and roll and scroll up. Looks like we've got a question from Cecilia, who says, "Hi, I'm 48. I'm a migrant and I am neurodivergent. This year, I will finally finish high school and I'd like to study philosophy. Can you please give me some advice or hints? Thank you so much." Wow. First of all, I'm proud of you for taking steps that make sense, even if they come not in the season in which society expects them to come. Obviously, I want to know what kind of neurodivergent you are. If you're autistic, that's one thing. If you're ADHD, that's another. What I would say is you've got to be very assertive about how you learn relative to your neurodiversity. Now, sometimes you yourself don't know, and especially if you're autistic, it's hard to articulate your own needs. It's hard to listen to yourself. It often takes a lot of time to stabilize into a perspective that says, oh, that's working for me, but that isn't. So I'd say be really assertive about how you learn, because it's in everybody's interest, not just in yours, that they do on their side whatever they can to help you learn in the way that works for you. Even with neurotypical people, we have a society that really struggles to understand that people and children too learn at very different tempos and in very different ways. I mean, let me give you a very quick personal example. I got sick at about 22 in 2003. Before I got sick, things were going kind of well for me, but I was a very bad student at school. I went to 2 state schools in the UK, a really bad school that was sort of violent and for dysfunctional children. And the second school was just a really solid, comprehensive state school. And when I was doing A levels, the last couple of years of school, I was thrown off the political philosophy A level, even though I knew I would be a political philosopher. And I was thrown off the music A level, even though I knew that my professional life would have something to do with music too. And I had to repeat a year at school because I didn't turn up to my A level exams in the first year. I chose to watch football instead. And when I repeated the year, I continued not to turn up because I was only interested in doing my own work. And I just about managed to get to the very worst university on my list of choices. And even they were reluctant to take me because I didn't take all the exams I was meant to take, and I didn't turn up to some of them, even after repeating a year. But as soon as I got to university, what I was asked to do was exactly what I wanted to do. And so I went from a completely failed student who was in love with the disciplines he was failing to being a star student who kind of got in the papers for getting freakish feedback from university teachers, but nothing could change. They just carried on being the same. So people learn in different ways and have very different needs. Second, I would say, how feminine do you feel? If you feel really feminine, and that would depend again on your relationship with your neurodiversity, try to find women in philosophy who speak to you, a tradition of women. In the 20th century, it could be Simone Weil or Iris Murdoch, and understand that you should explore what it means for a woman to do philosophy versus what it means for a man to do philosophy. It's okay if you conclude it's the same thing, but you've got to explore that. Third thing I would say, don't let anybody tyrannical confuse for you what the passion for philosophy is versus what the passion for a very particular narrow school of philosophy is. So don't be afraid to resist a situation where you are streamlined to do philosophy a la Derrida or a la J.L. Austin. So that's it. And then, keep on forth, keep on exploring what this step should mean to you for the rest of your life. What do you want to do with this? Um, you know, keep feeling that through. Keep that an open question to some degree, because you want this degree you're about to do to have the kind of place in your life and be the kind of platform in your life that you want it to be, not the kind that society wants it to be for you. Right. Russ, greetings from my home country this time, which is Canada. I'm curious how you ended up in an ultra-Orthodox school where you spent 2 hours a day praying. What was going on in your head during that time? So my family moved from the Soviet Union to Israel before the Soviet Union collapsed, which is interestingly why I've never actually lived in Russia. Even though I used to visit up until recent years quite a bit. The whole thing was magical and led to disillusionment because it was a kind of high end experiment in blood and belonging in theory. But in practice, it was a lot of people escaping a really shit economic situation in the Soviet Union and trying to get a better life either in Israel or using Israel as a platform to move on to Canada, Switzerland, the UK, the USA, and so on, France. Now, that's the big picture. The narrow picture of why I went to that ultra-Orthodox school, which was educational for me, and that's why I can say things like I read the Torah twice in Hebrew, beginning to end, is that my family didn't feel very Jewish at all, to be blunt, but they felt that these tighter community, more intense schools could maybe give a better education in sort of maths and the foreign languages and whatever. So it's a kind of a pragmatic decision because the quality of general education was quite good in these schools. It was a bit military camp-like, right? There were no games. It was sort of like a competitive press-ups at physical education sessions. There was corporal punishment. Teachers struck you. I once got into trouble for drawing an American flag on a fighter plane I drew because you couldn't do that. You had to draw the Israeli flag, which I thought was ludicrous as Israel was stuffed up to its neck with American weapons. Quite frankly, I chewed gum, and now I'm 11 at the time, 10 to 11. I chewed gum and thought about banalities whilst I was praying, perhaps 40 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes before lunch. I rather enjoyed the community knit feeling about it. On their side, they knew I was completely non-religious, but they were happy to overlook that and just welcome me in. And so they knew I was going through the motions, really, when I was, doing prayer. But I was open, I was respectful. And of course, it taught me something about religious fundamentalism. It taught me something about thinking of history and geography as destiny, connected with your group, the destiny of your group's collective self-realization. And what's interesting, however, is that I don't want to over milk that, because what's most striking for me is how much secular Israelis who wouldn't dream of sending their kids to school like that still have some kind of animating image of historical destiny underpinned by a kind of sense of precarity, right? And that sense of intoxicating precarity that we're surrounded, but we're still strong enough to withstand, is very alluring for children. But it's also very conducive to sociopathy and psychopathy. It's very conducive to what a lot of Israelis struggle with, and that's to realize what world historical abomination their regime has caused in Gaza. So my experience of it was rather banal, but at the same time, I learned a few things. But I shouldn't overestimate that, because I do think there's a certain form of radicalization that applies even to, Frappuccino sipping secular Tel Aviv-based Israelis. But we shouldn't generalize. I mean, there are also incredible people in Israel who have a better, sober critique of Israeli politics than anybody outside. Lou, my 96-year-old mom died last week. I'm 71. I'm doing okay. Your thoughts are valued. Lou, there is something really, really big about losing a parent. There's something very existential about losing a parent. Whether, you are 30, 50, 70, or 90. With death, we always deal, as my hero Richard Wolheim used to say, with two things, not one. Death confronts us with the death of a particular individual we love, but death also confronts us with death itself. So every time we go through something really huge like this, we are dealing with two things, not one. And then it becomes even more complex when the death of the particular individual is our own death. And that's a situation where our relationship with death generally and our relationship with death of a particular individual merges. So you're next, right? And that's something that is very profound, very beautiful, very peaceful potentially. But it's real, right? Even if, as I hope was the case with your mom, it's a blessing to pass away at 96. It's a privilege. It's still really, really big stuff. And, it takes 18 months to sort of stabilize for a lot of people, their response. Sometimes it's not the case if you knew it's about to happen and you were sort of processing it anyway, sort of already before the event. So wishing you peace and wishing you the capacity to dance with your mom's death and dance with death itself. Florin. Hello, Vlad. I'm a blind generalist. I'm a gifted generalist. This is better. Always struggling to develop skills beyond my initial talent. Can ADHD play a role in this? If you have ADHD, absolutely. It could send you into 101 directions. So one of the things that ADHD can do is undermine what a lot of people are very good at. what very small number of people are very impressively very good at, I beg your pardon, and that is focusing on your strengths. My recommendation is always, if you can, triple, quadruple down on your strengths rather than try to fix your weaknesses. We have a somewhat coercive, uh, self-directed violence type of um, thread in our culture that says that everybody's got to look at what they're worst at and bring that up to an average. No. We have to celebrate people's strengths and accommodate the fact that they might have really wonky weaknesses. A life lived in a fulfilled way is typically a life where you've gone a long way toward expressing and elaborating your strengths rather than compensating for your weaknesses. So that kind of distraction where you should be reading books and writing something, but instead you are building a shed and then repairing your pipes, and then rebuilding your roof, and then starting some kind of social club in your local area that you're semi-interested in. So that's one risk with ADHD that you want to be very, very clear about avoiding. Any advice on cultivating my talent for developing my talent? Florin adds. You have to understand that there is something that you love, you might love doing. And then secondly, you understand that your relationship with that thing you love doing is about a process in time. It's about patience and it's about exploration. This is my relationship with carpentry, amateur carpentry today. This is what I would love and enjoy it to be 20 years from now. Maybe I can explore some basics over the next year or so, then I can move forward and do something else and something else and something more and so on. So it's about exploring your talent over time. And that typically means having a capacity to be able to look at your talent sideways and think of it as either something mechanical, like different levers you pull in different ways, or something organic, which is even better, like images of, I don't know, climbing a mountain or something, or swimming. And you look at all of these motions you're making around what it is you love doing, and you say, well, is that motion necessary? Is this motion improvable? Is there some motion I'm not thinking of at all? Am I copying too much how others are doing this rather than getting around my own ways of doing whatever it is I'm trying to do? So it's a process of open-ended exploration across time. And of course, the distraction and impulsivity of ADHD could potentially scatter you in 101 directions, whereas you need just two. Almost enlightened cow. How would you answer, where are you from, especially for people with a more rigid definition of national belonging? How have you been otherized and how have you reacted? So, I mean, today, after coming out of a few hours of sort of real suffocation, I entertained myself with my sister, who is this week again back from Portugal to be my carer, um, by looking a little bit at my genetic data, which keeps getting updated. I noticed that my Ashkenazi Jewishness went up from 50.5 to 50.7, so it's half. The other 45% plus is different kinds of Eastern Europe. Funnily enough, Russia seems to be fourth. So it's Poland first, Ukraine second, Belarus third, Russia fourth. There's a little bit of an exotic element. A couple of percentage points maybe from the Middle East, even smaller elements of something from North Africa. Very fun, means nothing to me. Means nothing to me. Also, I do not identify at all with being 50% Ashkenazi Jew. Just means nothing to me. My public intellectual hero, if you like, Isaiah Berlin, was enormously conscious, self-conscious about his Jewishness and thought a lot about it. A few Israeli viewers have invited me to admit that I am Jewish by identity. I just don't relate to it. I don't really recognize myself as being Jewish. It doesn't mean much to me. It's a foreign tradition of which I have intimate knowledge. If pushed, I say I'm European. If pushed more, I say that I feel most culturally at home in Central Europe, Germany above all. I also feel culturally at home in London, UK, and I appreciate much about traditions on this island, including the tradition of philosophical empiricism. I just about still feel sort of semi at home in maybe Prague, maybe Budapest, but you move further east and I'm less at home. I could love the places, but I know I'm not of there. Whereas in Berlin, I feel very at home. And in London. What role does Russian identity have in me? Because I am certainly not identifying with the fact that I'm more Polish and Ukrainian than I'm Russian. I don't recognize myself as being Polish at all. So what's the Russian story there? I mean, I'm 9.5 years in the Soviet Union, living in Moscow. It's my first language that I learned, from birth. Then by the age of about 11, Hebrew became my preferred language. Now I've largely forgotten Hebrew. So I would say that Russian identity inflects a little bit the components of my character that are basically all West European, all West and Central European. So I'm profoundly culturally alienated in Russia, and in Ukraine for that matter. Profoundly culturally alienated. I have deep insight, but it's 95% a foreign culture to me. It's wonderful to have such deep insight, the insight an insider has without yourself being an insider. There's a real sort of cultural bilingual privilege there, but I feel very challenged to even articulate my personality in the Russian language. My personality comes out fairly effortlessly in English. It's a strain in Russian because various blocks of my character are not so easily expressed in the Russian context. Cases of me being otherized. Well, there is a comical way that I'm sometimes otherized, and that is sometimes Ukrainians who are never in Ukraine, who say this in the West, sometimes suggest that I'm saying something because I'm Russian. Now, Ukraine is not Russia. Ukraine is a victim of a brutal imperialistic invasion by an unbounded neighbor. And Ukraine has very different political culture to Russia. But at the level of psychological proximity, they're still close. That's to say, how a random person in Ukraine would talk about issues with their girlfriend or boyfriend will be fairly similar to how the same person will talk about that in Russia. Will be more similar, much more similar than a Ukrainian and a German, for example. And so what I sometimes get is people are suggesting that I'm psychologically Russian, in the sense that I've formed a certain opinion on the basis of my Russianness. And let's say, for instance, I think Russia won't break up in the next 10 years. And well, Vlad, you're saying that because you're originally Russian. The irony is that the people saying that are 10 times closer to being psychologically proximate to Russians than I am, which is obviously an utterly humiliating critique to make. You know, I'm accusing you of this, but I'm 10 times closer to this than you are. So that's a comical and sort of cheap hyper identity politics way of being otherized. That's always really embarrassing. Because it's either got to be a psychological claim, which is self-refuting because that person is much more proximate to Russian culture than I am, or it's got to be genetic. But if it's genetic, I'm far more Ukrainian than Polish than Russian, so you lose that way too. That's a comical way of sort of bot-like otherization that can happen sometimes. Gregory. Hi, Vlad. I feel like by trying to convince someone caught up in post-truth, I'm subjecting them to psychological violence. But what else can I do? So it's a kind of political form of pain that you're imposing on them. Because if I have voted for Trump and I think about politics in a special way that's outside of cause and effect, I have magical thinking about politics, and you're trying to break that, you're attacking my agency. Because the cause of what I think is not an epistemic mistake, but a breakdown in trust. And I'm expressing how I feel about my trust in institutions having broken down. And you coming along and saying, no, you should just wise up. So you are making an intellectual move against me when I'm making an existential, embodied agency type, right? First personal agency type political gambit. So you're asphyxiating me out of political self-expression. So it's very, very bad. And it's possible, if I'm outside of cause and effect in the way I think about politics, that I find truth itself oppressive. One of the societal facts today we're dealing with is that many citizens genuinely find truth psychically oppressive. And the frivolous, cheap, resistance, liberal answer to this, that these people should just be better educated and less prejudiced and less malign, is just as delusional as the very delusion they're trying to break via this ill thought through intellectual conceptualization of something that is very much more deeply motivated. So understand the level of existential transformation you're demanding of people when you do that. Toby, last chat, you told me that you had extensive meditation experience. Any thoughts on navigating the world after realizing the emptiness of the separate self? So I don't believe the separate self is an empty thing. Whatever that means, we can have that conversation another time. What I would say now is that having meditated pretty much twice a day for 22 years, right? That's more than, I don't know how much that is, it's certainly more than 10,000 times. I can tell you that meditation taken deeply enough, and I don't take it that deeply, I've very rarely done it from within a tradition, partly because I've done it to manage my physical symptoms. I haven't done it in the context of demanding, Vipassana retreats and so on. But meditation takes you to places that go beyond the notion of meditation as technique. It takes you to places where you drift towards certain kinds of perception of things being connected, which epistemically you may not want to believe to be true. It's completely consistent to say that meditation is both extremely real making and healing, but also has the propensity to generate illusions. I mean, certain traditions, let's take an extreme example, might advance the notion that pain, physical pain, is not real. Now, that is just absurd. That's so absurd that the problem there isn't with somebody's perception of pain, it's with somebody's relationship to the difference between illusion and reality. So, meditation is both real making and nourishing and transformational, but it doesn't follow from that that it might not be also conducive to certain forms of illusion. And it could be that meditation takes you toward a certain image of reality that epistemically you cannot entertain. And that conflict, that tension, is something you dance with. You don't say, I'm going to give up my epistemic belief. But you also don't say, well, I'm going to stop meditating because that might be that it generates some propensity to illusion. So we'll talk about this in more depth, but that's a couple of cents. Stasis, scary wave of internet, screw tightening. UK rolls out age verification. You got to show ID to go online. Soon, the same will happen in the EU. Chat controls are back. Erosion of privacy and democracy, or is this necessary? Well, first of all, a lot of these moves will end up being just practically counterproductive. They're trying to solve a problem. In fact, they'll end up making it worse. No state is ever going to be perfect at staying out of your affairs and telling you the truth about what's going on. The sustenance of a modern liberal democratic society even is predicated both on a degree of violation of privacy, but also on a degree of opacity, withholding certain truths from citizens. Now, what we want to do is minimize that, but we can't eliminate it altogether. One of the striking cultural facts about our society is that, well, I have some people in my life who care terribly about privacy. We as a whole do not care very much at all about privacy. Now, that's a worrying pattern because our indifference to our privacy being intruded upon, now that's again a conception we need to fill out, but our reaction is, oh, it's fine as long as it's not authoritarian states doing it. But our states are slowly becoming authoritarian states, and we might need to change how we go. But at the moment, quite frankly, the vast majority of Westerners could not give a hoot about what Facebook or Google has on them. That's just the truth of where we are. So we might have increasingly a subculture of citizens who take very seriously their privacy, but it is going to be a subculture. And of course, we're now facing the same question with information folk give to ChatGPT. How do you know, Akaris is saying, when it's time to let go a friendship? Well, you don't want to let go too many friendships because romantic relationships are relationships of substitution. If not her, if not him, who else instead? You can't just keep adding partners one on top of the other. They're not going to want to be together with you. There are 7 of them. Even though polyamory is an interesting pattern in our culture that is growing rapidly. So romantic love is about substitution, which is why it's so sort of frail in the face of permanent comparison. Relationships of, if you like, platonic love are relationships of accumulation. You can typically keep on adding friendship. My advice usually is, if you are drifting apart from a friendship, if you're not mutually elevating one another, you don't need to cut people off. Just, go from seeing somebody every 6 months to seeing them every 5 years, and you'll be okay. The time you need to cut off is if your boundaries have been violated in your friendship. Boundaries in a friendship and in a romantic relationship are about who is to do what with whom and how. And boundaries are typically negative. It's healthy to conceive boundaries in the negative sense. What is not to happen? So I'll give you a very classic example. In my friendships with women, women are not allowed to sexualize me, and I'm not going to sexualize them. If I am in a friendship with a woman and she engages in a sexualization with me that constitutes a kind of disrespect to my partnership, that's going to be a non-negotiable for me. In fact, the only time I can think of ending a friendship was with somebody who wanted something that wasn't compatible with my boundaries around that. So, does your friendship violate your boundaries? I would say, apart from sexualization, there are also issues of exploitation. So, for instance, you might be in a friendship whereby somebody is exploiting your friendship for certain professional benefits. You might not want that. They're using you to get published or whatever, or they're using you to get results X, Y, Z in their career. Exploitation, right? Or if a friendship pulls you into practices you cannot participate in. It might be illegal practices or legal practices that you don't want in this life for yourself. So boundaries, negatively conceived, is the chief way we say, I'm so sorry, I can't go on. Johannes, I struggle with the paradox of tolerance in Western societies. My intuition is I keep checking that my mic is on because I keep turning it off by accident. It's got a button just where my hand likes to go. I struggle with the paradox of tolerance in Western societies. My intuition is to withhold the same rights to members of society that explicitly reject the values that these rights are based on. That doesn't sound pluralistic enough for me. The rights that we stand up for in a liberal society are not necessarily there because we understand them on the basis of shared values. For instance, I might believe in free speech because Jesus told me so, or because John Stuart Mill told me so, or because my Quaker community told me so. So I might come and get on the same train at the level of political principle for reasons that are very different at the level of value and at the level of epistemic wherewithal. It's a form of appalling tyranny to expect in a modern liberal society that we agree on the values that generate the principles that we agree to live by. It's one point. Now, a point about toleration that's very important. Toleration is a negative value. You don't tolerate what you semi-like, you tolerate what you struggle to bear. Right? Tolerance is about being a bit repelled by something, but still saying it's important that I coexist with this. Last remark. One type of political claim that I do believe in dismissing is a type of political claim that is incompatible with the sustenance of any kind of social order. So you might want very low taxation. Somebody might want very high taxation. You cannot try to exclude each other from the table of politics because of that. But if somebody says, I want to do something that's actually incompatible with any sustenance of any social order, like engage in arbitrary violence, then you say, no, that's not going to fly, and I reject that. To that degree, that person becomes not just your opponent, but your enemy. Echelon, thank you. Vlad, on a recent Q&A, you were rather dismissive of Holst's planets. Are there any British composers you rate highly? Yes. Well, first of all, I'm always keen to follow the latest developments in composition when my health allows. I'm interested in what people are writing today. One thing that I would happily, with the greatest pleasure, recommend is an album by the pianist Kit Armstrong. On Deutsche Grammophon, where he performs William Byrd and John Bull. Let me see when this came out. This came out in 2021, and it is warmly, very, very warmly recommended. So, and you're talking about composers from the 1500s there. I tend to have a very difficult relationship with music I consider kitsch, which is why I have blasphemous views about Russian classical music. I regard Rachmaninoff as a very good pianist and a composer of genius in the pop realm, but not a serious composer when it comes to art production, art music. So Rachmaninoff is not a great composer. He's a great pop star. I think he is a genius the way Steve Jobs was a genius at creating commercial products that appeal very powerfully to the culture. I also don't think Tchaikovsky is a great composer. I also don't think Shostakovich is a great composer. So these are completely blasphemous views in the realm of Russian classical music. I have a very high view of Russian literature. It's a very important branch of European literature. I don't have generally a high view of some of the great Russian composers, although I do, of course, admire Stravinsky very much. Big question from Vasil. What's self-improvement for you? How do you track it? I'm struggling from feeling that I become a worse person each year. So 3 different things. How good a person are you ethically is one thing. I don't think that's going to change hugely unless you're being ethically unlovely due to not having your shit together. A lot of people's ethical unloveliness is just not having their shit together. So a lot of qualities like being an amazing friend are in fact predicated on having your shit together. And so a lot of people who behave ethically badly are just people who don't have their shit together. So therefore being good is not just about intent, it's also about psychological capacity. Then there is the question of just how free you are, how yourself you are, right? And then there is a question of how you're developing your talent. So for me, ethical self-improvement is not something I track or reflect upon. My ethical life is really about just doing what is authentically a Vlad thing to do in each situation. Now, how free you are plays a role here. So, for example, when young, because I never had a single depressed thought in my life, and I still don't, right? I'm very privileged like that. Don't have anxiety issues. Now that comes through. That's part of the reason why so many people are happy to lean on me, because you can see my level of groundedness, stability. But that didn't mean I didn't have issues I needed to work through. And so I did about 6 years of psychoanalysis, which freed me up in some very important ways. So that's two very important, right? Um, uh, being yourself freely, owning yourself in a playful way too. And then the third thing is you're developing your talent. We already talked about that briefly. So how do I do that? This is extremely emotionally painful for me because I am virtually too sick to do any philosophy. But nevertheless, I improve as a philosopher every week because I make sure I do a little bit. And how do I improve? Well, I improve because my imaginative and reflective capacities become more trained. Um, I am better at jumping through certain hoops without even thinking about it. Um, I am better at stopping and starting, better at accelerating. So um, I am blessed, even though I virtually can't do philosophy, that I still experience philosophical growth every week, even though I'm not even currently publishing, I'm not in the philosophy department, and so on. I do hope at some point maybe some of these things can come, although at the moment my health has been trending in a down rather than an up direction. So that's a couple of cents. I'm going to skip political questions with your indulgence. Frown chat, Vlad, what do you eat regularly that doesn't exacerbate symptoms of ME and long COVID? Are there specific foods or ingredients? This never translates to other people. So this is purely a subjective statement about me. Um, in the context of both ME and long COVID, and I have both, and it's currently long COVID that's worse because my microvascular damage is so extreme, it's preventing me from standing up at all. And it's making me suffocate at the moment, sort of 8 hours a day. And I'm finding little windows like this to speak with you. Food is not a very important part of sort of regulating this. I cheat very often, and I eat almost everything. But on the days when I don't cheat so much, I tend to be on a diet that's full of greens and sort of biodynamic meats. I'm not vegan. I'd be more vegan if I were well, but the right diet for me is a sort of diet high on greens and high on meats, and I exclude, not all the time, but tendentiously, um, crops, all legumes, all dairy, all sugar, and I eat these when they're delicious. So in fact, I had a ragu last night that was made by my sister for me, and I really enjoyed it. So I cheat all the time, and while I am profoundly and terrifyingly ill, I'm not at this point in a position where I cannot eat. A lot of people with ME are in that position. I'm not there at the moment. So food affects me negatively. Often means I can't eat, or I need to eat little quantities. But I'm able to eat. And tendentiously, what I tend to avoid is the list I gave. This does not translate to anybody's health needs except mine. Gregory says, I want to thank you for the paraphrase from Aristotle about the time-independent nature of whiteness in a non-racial sense, obviously. It helped me a lot psychologically. Was it in the metaphysics or in the Nicomachean Ethics? It's in the Nicomachean Ethics, in the section where Aristotle discusses Plato's form of the good. And what Aristotle is saying there is that we perennially have a prejudice when it comes to a concept or an idea of saying, look, either this thing has got to be everything we want it to be, or we have to throw it out of the window. And very often we need modest, humble, realistic, naturalistically realistic, empirically realistic, psychologically realistic conceptualizations that might not, get us anywhere near where some kind of highly metaphysically or conceptually ambitious idea about what that concept should be, might take us. And so it's in that light that Aristotle said a white thing ain't going to be any less white if it's white for a single day versus if it's white for an eternity. It's equally white in both cases. It's not blue. I was wondering, what is authenticity? We'll talk about that in a separate video on the philosophy channel, Piotr is asking. Authenticity is the most important value in Western culture today, number one. Number two, authenticity is overwhelmingly misrepresented in its most expressions. It's chiefly expressed as consumerist narcissism, me, 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 me. This is repulsive self-indulgence to our culture. It affects everything from the way we consume products to the way we parent. But that doesn't mean that underneath our corrupt usage of the value of authenticity, there isn't a legitimate and constructive value of authenticity in which we're completely dependent. What is authenticity? It's the capacity to freely and continually become who you are across your life. Keep becoming who you are across your life. We'll talk about it more. Johan, my brain seems to only want to think in terms of what I should do or what's best for me. When it comes to what I want, the question seems nonsensical. Some humans are extremely gifted at seeing into themselves. Other humans are a bit shit at seeing into themselves. For a lot of humans, and this is very terrifying when it's the case, you look into yourself and you don't see a damn thing. It's a blank. Either because there is nothing there, but more likely it's because you don't know how to see. And that incapacity to look into yourself often generates a situation where you go about your life just being reasonable. But you don't need to be reasonable. You need to be reasonably yourself. The capacity to look into yourself can be cultivated, but it's often not an epistemic quality, but a form of psychic freedom that allows you to do it. So therapy is a very important tool there. Short of therapy, half an hour every day of free association. Get out a blank book, write down whatever it is you're feeling. Right? So free association. I'm sitting here interacting with the beautiful community. What are the things that are coming up? It doesn't matter if what's coming up is about how you hate capsicums. Write that down too. Olga would love for you to do an episode on Machiavelli. Yes, we can do that. We discussed Machiavelli briefly on the philosophy channel, somehow in connection with Putin. So Google Machiavelli Vlad Wexler on YouTube, Google on YouTube, whatever. Search on YouTube and you'll find that. We'll come back and talk about it. Andre, I have a very serious autoimmune disease. I can't walk and I lay in bed mostly. This is very tough psychologically, and you're my hero because you are able to work intellectually in a much worse condition. So I'm just sending you bucketfuls of courage and gentleness. Dominic, my PhD studies have been grueling, just diagnosed with ADHD. By the way, guys, do you see how prominent neurodiversity is? Right? These are big numbers. Look at it, it's coming up and coming up and coming up. Now, it's a bit skewed because I've aired the fact that I'm open to talking about it. As somebody who knows a lot about it, is still learning, but I'm neurotypical myself. I'm not ADHD and I'm spectacularly non-autistic. But even allowing for that, it's coming up a lot. And I am myself evolving on this. My position a year or two ago was, you've got to talk about it when it comes to people who have enormous power. Musk, Trump, so on, Liz Truss. Now I'm saying it may be even okay to talk about it with any public figures. But I'll have a chat about the ethics of talking about people's brains even if they don't know about their brains. It requires an ethical discussion. So, Dominic, my PhD studies have been grueling, just diagnosed with ADHD, but I love my subject. What's your advice for choosing wisely between postdocs and industry? Look, it's less, well, it's partly about industry, but it's also about accommodation within that industry. And that second could be even more important, right? I mean, a lot of ADHD people can't read, for example, right? If I saw a brilliant ADHD person who couldn't read, I couldn't give a hoot. I'll find a way for them to work for me if I were hiring people, because they're probably going to be brilliant. And they're probably going to be able to do a lot in a very short period of time, while also at other times struggling to be productive and so on. So you have to be very honest at looking at what your brain is like and what is sustainable and what is not sustainable for you, neurologically and physiologically, right? The best thing I would recommend is splurgy splurge. Splurgy splurge if you can afford, and find yourself a very good ADHD coach. Just have a session, maybe 3 sessions, and work out that question. And they might tell you, for goodness sake, never go into academia, but you can go into journalism instead. So as reasonable as I am going to be at advising you, if you told me more, a really serious neurodiversity coach will do better. And look, you might say, well, why am I going to invest, like, a quarter of a monthly salary, for instance, into this? Well, if it's a lifelong career choice, that's very cheap. That's very cheap. Why would I? I'm so sorry. It's an hour, and we're just getting through the questions that were left before we're about to start engaging with the super thanks and the questions during the during the live. So, why would I is saying, I've had to emigrate. Oh no, there's a question that starts before. Hey Vlad, during COVID, I became addicted to substances. My friends moved on, built their careers, and started relationships, and my life was chaotic and hard. Since I've had to emigrate, I'm currently doing my master's, but my confidence has never been the same. And unlike before, I don't feel like things will get any better. How can I fix this? I doubt you can fix this alone. You need structures of support. You need people in your life who know that you're going through this and who see you, and who sometimes see you clearly enough and accept you clearly enough that that their acceptance of you helps you to accept yourself better. So you need social infrastructure. You cannot do it alone. Seek it out. Don't be afraid to ask, to push your boat out, to embark on new friendships. But also know you're going to have to offer something in these friendships. They're reciprocal relationships. You can't just take, you need to give. Obviously, therapy then is the next step. Therapy isn't right for everyone, but it's right for almost everyone. But there are very different modes of therapy, and some modes of therapy are absolutely right for some people and absolutely wrong for others. So there is no mode of therapy that is right for everyone who needs therapy. So that's a real tricky thing. So if you can possibly afford it, do a bit of modality shopping in therapy and see what works for you. If you can't afford it at all, explore some free options if they are available in any way to you. Often free options are low quality, but you have to just test. If nothing like that is available at all, it's social infrastructure, people around you, and maybe then some DIY building up of yourself. Now, a lot of motivational content is really, really bad. But some of it you could find might work for you. I don't know, some kind of Tony Robbins program could work for you. You can follow it at home. I don't know how much these things cost these days, $300. Might not be a fit, might be a fit. Try to avoid people who are obviously bogus and scamming you and have nothing to teach you. But there's a DIY way of doing this. The other thing I would say is, unless you're physically ill, physical state matters a lot. Moving matters a lot. So, if you are hideously overweight, you're putting things into your tummy that don't belong there, you're going to have to address that somehow. And that might be not just about psychological growth, but also about discipline. If you're in good physical health, just understand the importance of physical exercise. Also explore whether there might not be something deeper mental health going on that might need medication, right? If that's the case, then you may need not so much therapy, but therapy plus some kind of intervention if you're having issues with anxiety or depression. Okay, let's assume that we've caught up. Let's jump on super thanks for a moment. Jürgen, what core principle would you prioritize? I don't know what your question is about, but I tend to never prioritize core principles in general. What core principle would you prioritize in a new social contract for a post-authoritarian Russia, and how would you overcome its historical barriers? I don't want to answer that question in detail because we're doing a personal Q&A, but what I would say is that a central principle for Russia would need to be decentralization. If Russia does not decentralize, its chances of simply collapsing increase. Federalization, decentralization. The second principle would be to address the grotesque levels of inequality in the country that are conducive to authoritarianism. Lou B, I appreciate your grand ability to inspire new thoughts. I'm grateful to you for walking with me. And I'm holding your hand at this time when you're going through a big thing. Hi, Vlad. Thanks for all the something says. I wanted to ask how to deal with addictions. No matter how much I want, things always end up being where they were. So I'm very keen to talk about neurodiversity often. I'm keen to talk about different patterns that we fall into. I feel that there is genuine expertise on addiction that is out there that I am not able to equal. It would be unethical of me, I feel, to give you 3 or 4 tips on addiction because I don't have the depth of context. I don't have the depth of context. And I apologize for that, but it would be wrong for me to come up with 3 things. If you were my friend, I would tell you 3 or 4 things that I have in mind. But as I'm speaking to other people who might have similar challenges, the quality of what I might tell you will not be high enough for it to be ethically responsible for me to say it. Daniel, what was Ukraine like when you lived there? I never lived in Ukraine. I only visited a million years ago as well. I've never lived in Ukraine. I've never lived in Poland. All I said, I did a bit of genetics testing ages ago, and I am very Polish and Ukrainian on the basis of that. Jason, thank you for your contribution. What is the biggest flex for a man, in your opinion? I think it is when a man's wife doesn't have to work. Well, it completely depends on what your wife wants. I could conceivably even imagine a flex whereby the man stays at home. It's not true that all women are better at parenting children than all men. Some men are better at parenting than women. So I don't have any issues with a couple staying at home in a reverse order to what is typical, where the man stays at home and the woman works. One of the biggest impulses for a masculine man, this is not necessarily going to apply to gay men or very feminine men. At the same time, it's also, of course, true that a very masculine man needs to be healthily in touch with his femininity, right? Our model of a masculine man in our society typically denies the feminine element, which means the men are weak. I don't do this language of beta, and alpha, but our alpha men, role models, are all beta males. They're beta males. The Joe Rogan podcast is full of beta males. Beta males, not alpha males. Alpha males, and Rogan is himself immune from this, actually. You might think he's delusional politically and so on, but he actually has a very healthy masculinity, unlike many of his guests. But what you want is to be powerful while also not running away from your feminine side as a masculine man. Now, what does being a masculine man draw you toward? It draws you toward a kind of physical freedom very often. Boom, I'm going to tear through the scaffolding here and I'm going to run. I'm going to smash this path. I'm going to make it to the top of the mountain. I'm going to be free. I'm going to walk through this wall. I'm going to go wherever I want. Now, that understood properly is actually very compatible with lifelong partnership and commitment and relationship, because lifelong commitment in a partnership can actually be an extraordinarily exciting thing. My heroes, my philosophical heroes, very often lived in blocks of 15, 20 years, one marriage, another marriage, another marriage. I'm not a big believer in that. I think you can shuffle through, but eventually I want something you settle. For me, something important is to settle into something until you die. So it can be utterly thrilling, but to have a life partnership, utterly thrilling to be a father, but you have to relate to that as something that you are doing with kind of free abandon. It has to be a case of you taking what you want. It's just not a very selfish form of taking. It's a form of taking that elevates others too. So that's one kind of flex, that you can be recklessly free, almost recklessly free, but in a way that's actually going to elevate others around you. And it's going to be not an evasive way of being recklessly free, whereby you run away from commitment and responsibility. One big flex. Another big flex is that you ground others around you, that you are stable. That if the apocalypse took place tomorrow, unlike most men and women, you'd keep your shit together. If the apocalypse happened tomorrow and there was societal collapse, most people would completely freak out. A big flex for a man is if the apocalypse comes and they are able to keep their shit together and even lead. And we don't have the apocalypse in our part of the world, at least, but it might be that people who have good emotional intelligence can look at that man and say, oh yeah, I can see that he would be like that. Well, I think that's a wonderful flex. There are amazing flexes for women, for feminine women. And it might be that flexes for less feminine women and more feminine men might be more similar. And flexes for feminine women and masculine men might be more different. But these are a couple of flexes for a man at the level of freedom, number one, and number two, at the level of a deep existential groundedness. Because most men and most of our fake alpha models, as soon as you peel away the layers of society, they're going to start crying. They might be physically strong. They might be able to drive vehicles and do various kinds of things. That's impressive. Sure, it's important. But they could melt down. and start feeling loneliness, start feeling a lack of connection, start feeling like they don't know what they want, start feeling like something's going on inside them and they can't fully articulate, and so on. Third thing, big flex for a man, is to be able to clearly articulate what you want. Most men struggle to know what they want. Most men float. This is what I'm about. This is what I'm doing. This is who I am. That's also a very big, very nice flex at the level of authenticity. So we've done freedom, we've done groundedness, we've done authenticity. Of course, the list can carry on. Unfortunately, today, too much of a big flex is, so I'm challenging you a little bit, too much of a big flex is a kind of equation between character and money. Good character might go together with having a lot of money. It might not. Having a lot of money is not an expression of sound character. It's barely even evidence for sound character. Astra Guy. Hello, Vlad. Do you think MAGA and MAGA-like movements in the West are unique in history? Too political. I would say that any cultural moment you look at is going to be to some degree unique because of cultural circumstances that produced it, being a matter of, being generated by certain social forces that have never quite been around in the same constellation that are around in today. At the same time, humans have a universal psychology, and as Thucydides teaches us, a lot of the problems of politics are recurring problems in politics. Gerald, what should we think of the phenomenon of young adults living with their parents? Too sociological for today. I want personal questions. I beg your pardon, I didn't emphasize that enough. I think that there are real experts in the social sciences who could give a better answer. I think that we certainly have a situation where people mature later. For me, a 27-year-old girl, 27-year-old woman in 1985 is like a 44-year-old woman today. For me, a 30-year-old boy, 30-year-old man in 1985 could be a 58-year-old today. Men are even worse at maturing these days. So it's a genuine retardation of maturation in our moment of cultural moment. Sure, we recognize that. One remark. Another remark is obviously the extraordinary building of economic inequality and inaccessibility of certain goods like housing. As a political philosopher, I can tell you this is a very big problem. People who do not own a property, it's harder for them. People who never own a property or can never own any property they could ever like. That's the predicament for, quite frankly, most of us. That generates a situation whereby it's hard to feel at home in your country, in your society, and it's hard to feel patriotic. It's hard to feel a shared sense of solidarity. It's very dangerous for social fabric if young people can't own property. Hi, Vlad, beautiful community. Shadow Guy is saying, as a lifelong sufferer of ADHD, I believe it's also partly responsible for me speaking 3 languages and living in Switzerland despite starting out in suburban. Absolutely. If anything, when we look at super high achievers in our society, the first question might be to check whether or not they're neurodiverse or not, because so many of the super high achievers in our society are ADHD, autistic, or ODHD, which is both. Daniel, my great-grandmother was from Ukraine. World War I traumatized her. This and her schizophrenia put much on her shoulders. Somehow she managed to live to 100. How do we balance mental resilience from versus repression? I think a very important lesson is that humans before us went through precarity, uncertainty, and hardship and kept hope. That's what's happening to us right now is kind of bad by the standards of recent history, but it's not that bad at all, in fact, by the standards of history generally. A side remark, repression is not good. So what you don't want to do is be fragile and pretend you're not. You want to become less fragile. But it's wrong to be fragile and just talk as though you're not. Talking as though you're not fragile is not going to make you less fragile. So there is no need for a kind of a bogus bravado whereby we're not being gentle on ourselves like we need to. Be as gentle on yourself as you need to be, and even a little bit more. Therian Zul is saying, I'm increasingly becoming supportive of radical leftist positions as an American living in a nation ruled by cruel billionaires. Is it wrong to cheer for violence against the ultra wealthy? Yes. My thoughts are so angry nowadays. Now, violence is inherently the politics of enemies. The politics of enemies is always counterproductive. It's always antithetical to not just political, but economic democratization, what you want, right? Why is there such preposterous, farcical concentration of wealth in certain people's hands? And why do other people work full time and still can't afford a living and still live in fear about providing for their family, and in the fear that the fear of providing for their family will sustain? So, no to violence. But yes to anger, and it's about making anger constructive. What you want is for your anger to be politically effective and not just politically expressive. Expressive anger makes you feel better or worse, doesn't change political reality. Effective anger is anger that um, uh, is tied into a realistic account of agency in politics. What do I need to do to get something, however small, to shift from A to B to C and to make the world less bad? So that's the beginning of a conversation about your question. Of course, not the middle, let alone the end. Thanks for your kind words, Ross. Says Ross, thank you back. Always reason. I went through destruction of all things that I saw as purpose or things that had potential for it. I changed. I lost the fear of death, and hope smells like a disease. Does this have a name, or is it just me? Let me try this again. I went through destruction of all things that I saw as purpose, or things that had potential for it, potential for purpose. I changed, lost fear of death in a constructive or a reckless way, maybe a reckless way, and hope smells like a disease. Does this have a name? It depends on whether your psychic reality completely mirrors this and you're suffering a lot psychically, and thereby we might talk about certain things like depression, or whether this is a matter of, you know, something less deep of frustration and intellectual inability to see what the point of politics is and so on. I'm going to outsource this, I'm afraid, because I don't know enough. I can't see enough from your comment. My advice is always to explore the possibility of professional help. With a question like yours, it'll often be the case that in a therapeutic context, you might arrive at an answer 2 years from now. It's very, very difficult to keep talking about therapy when people talk about struggling, because it's money and time and money. And most people don't have that luxury. So it's very, very difficult. But that's my first recommendation. second recommendation is always some social support and social infrastructure. My third recommendation is some kind of, self-development program where you're encouraged to proactively, um, start getting your mind in order. I would say just generally, it's likely that your intolerance of the world is actually intolerance of your own mind. So how do we bring it about that you're comfortable in your mind? And that, we reduce this situation, not take it down, this situation whereby you want to lash out at the world as a form of really lashing out at yourself. But I think an exploration of what's driving this is for a form of expertise that I can't quite offer. But I wish you a lot of courage and also a lot of patience with this, and holding your hand, because this is very scary. It's hard to process human DNA, says other people's success. I'm kind of happy for them, but deep inside, I'm so competitive. I just can't be truly happy for other people. I know it's childhood trauma, hard to process. So my own view is that there is a destructive and a constructive form of envy. The destructive form of envy we all know about. The constructive form of envy is envy that is conducive to growth. That's to say, you're looking at somebody and saying, in my case, oh my God, they are a beautiful philosopher. Oh, I can take this and that from them and become more beautiful myself. Nice. Constructive envy. So there's envy that is conducive to growth, and there is envy that is parasitic upon growth. You don't want to engage in envy that is parasitic upon growth, but if you're doing that, you also don't know how to stop. It's not easy. My only suggestion, as ever, is what's the therapy modality that suits you, and can you afford it? And if you can afford it and you find the modality that suits you, do a bit of work. Life's short, so being happy and investing in that a little bit, if it's possible for you, can make a lot of difference. And that might just take a commitment to explore this, a commitment to make progress on this, rather than immediately gaining a solution. You're going to be surprised if you get a solution to this. You're going to be surprised by what your solution is, because from the vantage point of not having a solution, you can't see where the solution lies. Often you'll be surprised. How do you define the human soul, and do you believe such a thing exists? For me, it's too much not a personal question. It's a kind of religious or philosophical question. We can use that term metaphorically. If you want, there's only one sense of soul in which I'm probably going to resist, and that's that if you have a conception of soul that is incompatible with a scientific worldview. In that case, I'm going to depart from you. Otherwise, I use that term myself in several connections. Okay, let's have a look. I cannot believe we've got to an hour and a half with so few questions. Lottie Lane, can we have a political Q&A very soon? We're all increasingly desperate with questions. I would love you to address what you can't answer here. Well, I have done a few recently that are live chats. Do you mean non-live chat Q&A? And if you do, the answer is I'm going to do that too. I'm going to do a Patreon version of it. I know folks on there are extremely patient with me. They understand how ill I am. But I'm also going to do another version of it whereby maybe I do a little community post and I say the top rated questions are going to get answers. That's the way our friend of the channel, Jake Bro, does it. So that's about it. The answer is yes, yes, as soon as I can. And thank you so much, Amalfitano, for um, mm, more or less just saying what I've said. Yevhen, a tough question about PTSD. My heart goes out to you. I'm sending you strength and courage. You're in Ukraine, um, and you've got clinical depression and PTSD. Um, I'm happy to take an existential question for you, um, from you, but I am at risk of going beyond my level of expertise in answering you, because I can't just give you something if you're going to easily get a better product elsewhere. Um, so my answer is always, and I don't know how much that's possible for you financially. Um, I'm not sure how much that's possible for you practically, but my advice is always an exploration of a right modality of professional help. Um, I'm so sorry that I can't do more, but you'll appreciate it. That it's important not to give you a lower quality answer than you deserve. Thoughts on religion? Um, I am very pro-religion as a non-religious person, but we'll have more on that. More on that later. I'm very much against the sort of atheist camp of Richard Dawkins. Thimble, hi Vlad and beautiful community. You've mentioned before the idea of being gentle, being compassionate toward the side of you that wants to be hard on you. Advice to balance this without becoming too negative. So I often talk about being gentle on the part of you that doesn't want to be gentle on you. The way to think about this is of a conversation inside you between an adult and a child. What you don't want is to speak, um, to have the adult in you speak to the child in you the way you as an adult would never speak to a real child. If 6-year-old Emilia and her mum are making a carrot cake, but they realize they've got no carrots, and so they're going to have to make a different cake. And Emilia says, but why can't we have a carrot cake? And the mum says, are you stupid? How can you make a carrot cake without carrots? What are you doing? You're 6. Carrot cake needs carrots. What do you mean you want a carrot cake without carrots? You can't have that. That's not a thing that happens, right? Notice how absurd and almost abusive that response is. That is how most humans talk to themselves in their dialogue between the adult and the child inside them. So try to respond more like, sweetheart, like carrot cake and carrots and stuff like that. I think it might be a little tricky to do the carrot cake without the carrots, isn't it? Because carrots go in the carrot cake and we don't have any at the moment. So I think it might be just about doing a carrot cake another time, but doing a really lovely different cake today that's not carrot cake. And also just acknowledging, little Amelia, that you really want to have the carrot cake. Like, I can feel that you really want it. I feel it. I see you. I feel it. I know you really want it. I want it for you too. I love the way you want it. I want it for you, but it's not quite going to happen this time. But it could happen next time when they have the carrots. That's the difference. That's the difference. Talk to yourself more in the second way, less in the first way, in that dialogue inside you between the grown up and the child. Iserion, regarding your emotional intelligence video, as someone with autism, I struggle with the application. We've got a festival of neurodiversity here. I struggle with the appreciation of beauty and art on an emotional level. Any tips how to train this skill? It may be that aesthetic beauty of certain kinds doesn't speak to you. That's okay. Just like somebody might say, oh my God, I have the deepest relationship with painting, but life is short. I just can't have a relationship with like Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven. It's just not in this life. I know it's probably great, but it doesn't speak to me. That's completely okay. It may be that you have a wonderful relationship with gardening or with, I don't know, um, collecting antique books. You don't want to bend your autism in a direction where you don't want to go. It's good to transcend your autism as an autistic person, but it's not good to do that with any violence. So you got to dance with your autism, right? If you wanted to see how you can get further, what I would recommend is taking time if you can bear it. If you have autism without ADHD, you might well be able to do it. Take time. So what do you want? You want to engage more with a painting? Go sit in front of it for 45 minutes and see what happens. Allow it to happen. Also, don't forget that it might be hard for you to read your own response. Your own response might be something you only read with a delay. You have a lot going on emotionally. You can't categorize straight away as an autistic person. You can categorize like 2 weeks after it happens often. So just be really banal, like you'd be with a child of yours who wants to explore art. Put them in front of it and think about whether it's sort of green or yellow, whether it feels nice or not, and see what happens. Just explore it by giving it time, and you might really get into it. And then you might be surprised by how much you react and how much you notice. You probably do have a capacity to notice a lot, but it's also possible you're just not very aesthetic, right? It could be that you're just better at more technical stuff. It could be you're better at sport, God knows what. So there, if you did want to explore it, put yourself in front of these works and take time. And don't expect anything, just see what happens. I know that could be hard, but just find a way that works for you to give it a lot of time without too many expectations. Daniel, did you ever buy the Soviet propaganda as a kid? No, I probably bought Israeli propaganda a bit more as a child in Israel. For a year or two, at an emotional level, I sort of bought into Israel's fragile precarity and historical destiny. So I often thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to sort of kiss this girl in the bomb shelter, that kind of thing, when I was 10. Soviet propaganda, I didn't buy into at all, because I sort of began to have my very first elementary reflections on politics as a child in the 80s, essentially under Gorbachev. So at that point, there was a radical, almost magical idealization of the West in Russia, the very opposite of what you've got now. So my thinking at the time was that the West, when I'm 6 years old, for instance, isn't just better politically, even militarily, but that individuals in the West are somehow happier and somehow devoid of problems and devoid of inner conflict. So I had a magical view about the West as a utopia, and that was common among many adults. The way this fantasy mostly expressed itself is that I looked through German toy catalogs. They weren't just toys, they were also like bits of furniture and clothes and so on, but they had big toy sections. And I looked at these toys, none of which were available to me. My toys were like well, I liked them, to be honest, but it was like one of them was a very heavy truck that was made from remnants of the military industrial complex. It weighed about 3 kilos and had metal soldiers in it. I had some funky fun toys too, but fundamentally, I was obsessed with these German catalogs and these pictures of German children dressed completely differently, eating completely different things, drinking completely different things, and living in completely different houses, and having access to these toys that for me stood for a certain kind of not just political but even psychic utopia. So it's not just I never fell for Soviet propaganda, it's that I thought that the West was a utopia and the Soviet Union was a complete shithole. I'm hoping one time to get around on the main channel to do a video about Soviet nostalgia. I mean, is it, let me just contradict myself a bit. Is it possible in me to trigger some nostalgia for some item in the Soviet Union? Yeah, it's conceivable. Absolutely. But I know it's also kitsch, and I know that cumulatively the place was a shithole. Certain things were better, arguably, very arguably, but they're very, very limited. Very, very limited indeed. Most things were worse. You know, and funnily enough, the very best things about the Soviet Union were actually certain kinds of social solidarity that were formed against the regime. After reading Jung, Hegel, Thomas says, I've started seeing cosmic narratives in my family between my father, brother, and me. Do you believe such patterns reflect structures, or are they projections? Well, it depends on how you construe these patterns. If, like Jung in many moods, you want to talk about things that violate the laws of physics, then I would say no, we can't do that. But if, on the other hand, you want to talk about various kinds of psychological types perpetuating, that's entirely possible. So it's entirely possible to give a fairly Jungian picture of family dynamics that doesn't indulge in sort of non-naturalistic claims about the cosmos. If you do want to make sort of non-naturalistic claims, for instance, if you want to talk about synchronicities of various kinds, then I would say that that pushes things too far. And that therefore synchronicities are coincidences. Funnily enough, it takes a lot more faith to believe in coincidences than in synchronicities, because the natural thing is to see the pattern and believe in it. The unnatural thing is to accept that something might be a coincidence. Well, here I'm just talking about sort of people connecting events across the globe according to synchronicity. It's not about what you're asking me, but the rough nutshell there is I'm going to be open to quite a lot, but I'm not going to be open to something we can't square with our best naturalistic understanding of ourselves. Vlad, do you believe, some guy on the internet, that most human beings are inherently evil in everyday life? And are you pretending that they're good, that they're good human beings? Do you think most are wolves in sheep's clothes? Lots of love. So I think that the concept of a wolf, when we talk about masculinity, is a constructive, healthy concept. Being a wolf is positive. It's about elevating others. It's about leading a life that's wonderful. So that's, being a wolf is not negative, and being a sheep is not positive. But human beings have both destructive and constructive propensities, right? Humans engage in prayer and in ethnic cleansing. Nothing that human beings do is against human nature. There is no way that human nature can send normative signals and say, well, hey, these humans did that, but actually it was against human nature. No, everything we do is an expression of our constructive and destructive capabilities. So you've got to accept both. What you don't want to do is over milk it in either direction. You don't want to say that we're more destructive than we are, although we're pretty destructive. And you don't want to say that most of our destructiveness is us trying to be good but failing. No, it's actually us being destructive, us wanting to destroy, us wanting power, us wanting to break things. Now, it's very important to make a distinction between, in our personal lives, between somebody who is capable and somebody who is incapable of having an ethical relationship that's kind of adequate with something. Very often it's not about intent, good and bad intent, but capacity. It requires a lot of psychological stability to be a good person. So don't conflate Ricky doesn't want to be ethically sound with Ricky can't be ethically sound. That's important. I also think that, here's one sociological remark, that on the whole, in romantic relationships, people are near their best at the level of trying to be good. Romantic relationships are a shit show in so many cases. But very often when somebody is contributing to a shit show, it's a very lamentable way of trying to do things that are good. I think there's a lot of good intent in romantic relationships. There's just a lot of poorly conceived, poorly expressed good intent, but there's a lot of good intent. So we want to call the shots there. We're going to call things as they are. We don't want to understate or overstate this good intent that human beings have in different domains. Wes, hey Vlad, do you believe the Baltic states are strong enough to politically resist the Putin regime? I did a video on the chat channel recently about this. My colleague, he's not my colleague, he's a regional expert, and I'm not, I'm a political philosopher commenting on some regions. But Mark Galliotti, who we're going to back on the channel, I'm sure, if and when I start doing some conversations again, health allows, would probably say that he leans to a yes, they're strong enough. I'm going to say that I lean to no, they're not strong enough. Backdashing, Vlad, as a transplant, someone who has had to reestablish and remake themselves in many places before you truly became an adult, do you ever find it difficult to relate to people who lived stably? No, I don't feel I remade myself much. I feel very much like I'm the same person I was when I was 7 years old. So I don't feel that at all. It's one line for me, very much one line. Interstellar, great question about the role of artists in AI. Bless you back. I can't speak about it now, but I'm committed to having a deeper conversation about AI with my very limited perspective around the interaction of AI and political stability. Vlad, what advice would you give to someone who struggles with OCD about real events and morality? I often worry I am morally tainted and unlovable. So, Brick Gatsby is asking this. Let me say this, but again, be very conscious that I'm keen to outsource this to professionals in the neurodiversity field. A very important question for OCD people is, am I autistic? A huge number of people with OCD are autistic, but they just walk around with the OCD label, so they don't understand themselves fully. That kind of self-discovery is absolutely vital. Not in this room, we're just 350 people, but in our community, there will be dozens minimum and more. In fact, people diagnosed with OCD who in fact have autism but don't have a diagnosis. One very key telltale sign that doesn't settle the issue, but it's sort of tendentiously informative is if you have OCD without paranoid thoughts, this is a real indication to get an autism assessment. If you have OCD with paranoid thoughts, I'd still consider it, but it's perhaps less indicative that you need an autism evaluation. So paranoia is very important there. So that's the first answer. Get absolutely clear about what the hell is going on. Is it really OCD without autism? Of course, we'll have another conversation another time what these labels even mean, how they relate to underlying biological reality and so on, but not for now. So get to the bottom of it. And just by extension, my piece of advice is do not treat psychological problems neurologically, and do not treat neurological problems psychologically or neurological issues psychologically. You don't want to think that having a different brain as an autistic person, for instance, is some kind of a psychological failing. It's not. We pathologize a lot of neurodiversity. Autism and ADHD are not psychological problems. They're not psychological failures. They are conditions that can lead to psychological problems and failures. In of themselves, they're not. They're just not. It's a disgrace that there are some who, psychologize these conditions. So what's psychological and what's neurological is one of the first things you want to figure out with you, right? So it might be something that I don't know, bringing your mast cell activation under control and bringing your diet in a better place could be where the impact lies, rather than through psychological work. So with expert help, get the difference between psychological and neurological. That's not even the beginning of an answer, but that's all I'm going to share today, if that's okay. Let's do 12 more minutes. Mordit is asking if I have a relationship with jazz. Roughly, I don't. I sometimes read about jazz when I'm able to. I sometimes listen to jazz. I know more about the blues than about jazz. So I am a neophyte. Will I, in this lifetime, develop a meaningful relationship with jazz? Probably not. For me, I'd rather have a deeper relationship with some extra kind of Beethoven piece I've never discovered before in depth. But that's not because I wouldn't love to. It's just because of priorities and limited time. But I have the greatest admiration for jazz and for the blues. Ofek, how do you advise young women who have problem dating men to face it out in the modern world? I think it's very important that we admit that there's a kind of crisis of men, and we don't outsource that to Jordan Petersons, who are going to misconstrue it. So it completely depends on what your challenges are, what you want, and what you have to offer. One thing I absolutely recommend you not to do is to treat dating as a game, because it commodifies not just the women you interact with, but the whole dynamic. So ignore a lot of the sort of pickup artist tips that you get. They're almost all ludicrously counterproductive and predicated on obscuring insecurity rather than exploring yourself and the world openly. I think that you need some systems for how you operate your dating apps. You don't want to be utterly overwhelmed by rejection. You don't want to be utterly overwhelmed by 6 or 7 apps pinging you and so on. So you want to be intentional. You want that very process of looking for somebody on a dating app, which is, I presume, how you're going to look for a partner. You want that process to be itself an expression of who you are and itself nourishing. Take a lot of time to write your profile. Write a profile that you're really proud of. Talk about it with 3 or 4 friends. Go through several drafts. Number 1 or 2, however many tips I've given. Understand that if you have an issue with self-loathing, as a lot of men do in our culture, that's a dead end for sophisticated women. Women who are grounded and complex are going to have no interest in you if you're self-loathing. You're not going to be able to give. Think about giving and receiving. Think about what you give in the relationship, what you want to receive in the relationship. If you don't know, think about how you explore that. When you react to a woman's profile, think about what's it like for her to be in the world, and write something that speaks to what it's like for her to be in the world. Don't say, hey, oh, how are you? I was also in Tokyo yesterday. Last year I was in Tokyo. It was great. No. I read your profile, and this is the feeling it gave me. Or it feels to me like you're that kind of person. Am I wrong? Or I was very moved by that part of your profile. Right? So you don't say something banal, and you don't ask for anything. You make a connection around what it's like for her to be her, and a correction around what she wants. Are you at all inspired by the way she wants the things she wants for herself? Right? If you are, say that. Say that. Think about how you talk without self-loathing about how you want to get from where you are in your life now to some point in the future. Understand that there's such a thing as negatively talking yourself into a negative outcome with dating. So be open. Don't be unrealistic, but be open. Understand that it's about serendipity. Something can happen very quickly. You could spend a year and not doing anything, not do anything that inspires you, not meet somebody, not start building anything lovely. Think about where you're going to go on your first date. What would work for you? to help you connect, to make you feel comfortable, but also to a little bit express who you are and your values a little bit. Think about values too. What are your values? What are your values? Like, what are your values? Generosity? What else? What are her values? Is there an overlap? You know, um, I will probably, given that we're going to talk about the crisis of men, and given that one time I actually wrote a guide I informally distributed to women, a dating guide. We might talk about it because women are having also a very difficult time online because they can't find anybody. So there's a problem on each side, but it's a different problem. So I've thought a lot and quite systematically about the online dating world, and I will be talking about it more. So it's just keep tuned, and I'll probably come up with better advice than what I've given now. Couple of more. Barnaby says, I attended a discussion with 2 survivors of the Hiroshima bombing. This has made me strongly emotionally committed to peace, yet I now fear for the co-option of anti-war narratives. You fear that anti-war narratives might be co-opted for bad purposes, as a lot of folks who support Ukraine do indeed. I understand now. But you can also make your way through that, right? You can also tell what anti-war arguments are good and what anti-war arguments are less convincing. Well, Punished Butler is asking, how do I deal with increasing political, economic homelessness, distress, and the rise of far-right authoritarianism? How do you deal with everything that's going wrong in our societies? We will be talking about that a lot. One thing I've often said is look at humans from the past who've got through hardship and uncertainty with hope. Grandparents, great-grandparents. One thing I'll add now is know the difference between when your side has to act and when your side has to prep for a situation whereby you're waiting out and then you're acting. It might be that that's about election time. So understand these differences. It feels sometimes like there is nothing you can do when destructive folks are in power and they're going to be there at least for a few years, and you hope they'll be kick-outable, but they might not be. But you don't do nothing in that time. You prep for when political windows of opportunity open so that when they do, you're ready. And just understand that whatever happens, it's always entirely possible to make the world 1% worse or 1% better at the level of democratization, at the level of the climate crisis, and so on. Armandus, what do you think of Slavoj Žižek? I love Žižek on Ukraine. I love Žižek's skills as a great intellectual entertainer. There is a paradox in Žižek, and namely, it is that he critiques a certain kind of commodification of society while himself being a commercial product, while himself being a certain kind of commodity. There is a real paradox there that undermines him. At the same time, he is himself not completely close to seeing that. There's a review of Žižek in the New York Review of Books by wonderful public intellectual colleague John Gray that roughly says exactly what I've said. Rothmans, would you recommend using dating apps as a way to go out into the world as an introvert or as someone who struggles to interact with the world? 1 trillion gazillion billion %. But it depends on where you are in the world. It may mean that you use some apps but not others. Um, you know, um, it could be there isn't an app that you find tasteful enough, but you've got to get out there. You've got to put yourself on a couple of apps, and you've got to a find the apps that best match what you're all about, and b make sure that when you're on the app, you're using the app rather than the app using you. Try to be the best of the app. Don't get co-opted into sort of generic, unthought through gestures on it. Try to be you and see what happens, because putting yourself out there doesn't mean you have to do anything. This means you give yourself an opportunity to explore, put your toes in the water, and that's a good thing. Ofek is replying back, thanks, Vlad. I'm grateful, especially for what I haven't done yet. Sometimes it's pretty harsh here. Love and peace. It's hard. A lot of people are struggling. A lot of people are struggling. We live in a world in which some of the social media content we consume gives us the impression that everybody's doing great. They're not, the opposite. People are really struggling, left, right, and center. And even in this little conversation, where a 4 out of 10 quality Vlad is sitting here and trying to give you his best, even here among some in our room, there's a real thirst to just find more oxygen, to just climb onto solid ground, to just take that little bit of weight off all this pressure on one. So people are desperate to struggle less, and a lot of people are struggling. So 2 hours, we've survived each other for 2 hours in a lovely smaller group of 345 humans. So I'm enormously grateful to you for being with me, and I hope we see each other soon. Lots of love, and bye-bye.